everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is your host, Kyle Buller. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the show. And if you're a longtime listener and supporter, thank you so much for being with us. Today on the show, I am joined by Dr. Ryan Westrum. You might remember Ryan from a previous episode. Ryan's an integration therapist, and I really encourage you all to go back and check out that episode if you want to learn more about Ryan's work. We get into talking about his integration book and what integration is and just the integration process in that last episode. So you can check that out by going to psychedelicstoday.com and going over to the podcast section and finding Ryan's older episode. It was about like a year ago or so. So I won't give too much of an intro about who Ryan is, so you can go back and check that episode out if you want. In this episode, we kind of play catch up. It's been a little bit since Ryan has last been on the show, and just wanted to kind of check in. And it was actually really kind of synchronistic. I might have mentioned this in the show, but I was going through some books and I pulled out his integration workbook and I was like, I wonder how Ryan's doing. And then literally I think a few hours later, he sent me a message about wanting to catch up. So I was like, oh, synchronicity. Let's just record about it and get you back on the show. So yeah, we just chatted about Ryan's little break from social media and the internet and really kind of taking the time with COVID to go inward and to do some of that work. We also get into this interesting conversation about who are we without the medicine. I think that's a really interesting notion to simmer on. So really thinking about like these liminal states between sessions and rituals. And I think that's been like a topic for a lot of folks during this time with COVID, where they haven't been able to maybe connect with their communities. And I know it's been a challenge for me not being able to go do breath work and connect with that community. I mean, obviously I have my own breath practice that I do on my own, but, I feel like that community setting, doing the work in that container, it's kind of like where the medicine's at times. And, it's been really challenging not to have that during this time for this past year. So just a really interesting thought to think about. And then we also kind of chatted about keeping people safe and exploring that idea of doing at-home use. People that have been exploring their own psyche during this time and really kind of talking about safety around that. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Dr. Ryan Westrum. And again, if you want to check out more about Ryan's work, you can go back to our older episode with him, or you can check him out online. He's got a website, which is psychedelicsintegration.net and Healing Souls LLC. So you can check out his website there. Yeah, I think that's it for that little intro. Some news updates. Let's see, we have an upcoming free webinar event called On Dreams, the Feminine and the Practice of Psychotherapy. So this is going to be a free webinar with Johanna Hilla and Maria Papasora. And this is kind of part of our Imagination as Revelation course. Johanna wanted to get an interview out. So we're going to be doing this on March 15th. That's a Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. You can check that out at psychedelicstoday.com and we'll have it under the event or course page there. Again, free sign up. Check it out. It'll be fun. We'll be talking about psychedelic integration in the psychotherapeutic practice, the role of the feminine in the healing journey, family constellations therapy, and its connection to psychedelics, dream work, and psychedelics, the similarities and differences. So this will be an interview style. So, we might touch on those topics. Maybe the conversation will go naturally and organically somewhere else. And then we also have our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course coming up. That begins on March 11th. And we have those two groups, the one at 2 p.m. and the one at 7 p.m. Those are both Eastern time. So check that out at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And I think that's it for some of our events that are coming up. I'm sure there might be more. I know Joe's been working on a few. But I think that's it for now. If you want to support us, feel free to leave us a review over at iTunes. I don't know if any of the other podcast platforms have reviews. You could leave a review on Facebook and make sure you follow us on all of our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe to us on any of those podcast apps that you listen to podcasts. And if you want to support us financially, you can go over to patreon.com/psychedelics today and leave a monthly donation to help keep the lights on and help to keep this project moving forward. And check out some of our free courses at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. So that's it for the intro this week. I hope you enjoy this episode with Dr. Ryan Westrum, and we will catch you on the other side. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Psychedelics Today. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Ryan Westrum again. Thanks for joining us, Ryan.
Thanks, Kyle. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. So for those that may not know about your work, could you give a little brief intro? And for those that want to dig deeper, we can refer you back into the archive to go check out your work about integration, your integration workbook. But we'll do a little quick intro.
Yeah. For the last 15 years, I've been a clinical psychologist specializing actually in sexual health and sexual identity. So my predominant role is a sex therapist. And there's a confluence of psychedelics that I've worked with recently, and a year ago wrote a book called the Psychedelics Integration Handbook, fundamentally building upon our practical integration skills, tools, historical information, as well as really living with an education of what integration is to each individual. So my daily practice is predominantly a blend of helping people integrate psychedelic work, holding space with holotropic breath work, experiential exercises, and then also helping people heal from their sexual stories, working with their sexual stories.
Awesome. Thank you. So we had a little bit of a synchronicity a few weeks ago. I just kind of packed a bunch of books up and I was looking for a book and came across your integration workbook as I was searching through my box of books, and I was like, "Oh, I wonder how Ryan's doing." And then that evening, you sent me a message.
Yeah, we have to be open to the synchronicity, don't we? It's beautiful.
Yeah,
and it's an honor to know that you're actually lugging that thing around, weighing in at a heavy 3 to 5 pounds. It's quite respectful that you're still carrying it with you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, it's part of my library now.
Thank you.
Cool. So what have you been up to? I know we wanted to do a little bit of an update and kind of check in about some of your work and how it's evolved a little bit during this pandemic. And
I think that brings a point to talk about what I've been doing clinically is really shifting my practice intentionally. And then also, as you just alluded to, synchronistically, listening to my clients and talking about who we are without medicine, because with the pandemic, there has been an enormous amount of kind of fear or uncertainty, to speak about it loosely, working with medicine. When we enter into the states of consciousness, we're really surrendering to something beyond ourselves. And what I've been formulating, Kyle, is seeing clients really working on more of a collective story about our universe, of our collective unconscious, even though we're attempting to try to heal potentially individual stories or traumas. It's difficult to do, which led me to really start focusing and harnessing more on practical integration, developing that narrative about who we are without the medicine, the liminal space between big sessions or leaning on our rituals.
Yeah, I love that. And I remember I just wrote that down. And that question, and I think that's a good question for all of us to kind of meditate on is, who are we without the medicine, or being able to have access to medicine, if that's been part of your life, for the past few months or past few years. And, during this time, a lot of people can't travel and go to retreat centers and kind of engage in that work. I'm sure it's still happening. I'm sure there's things that are still kind of happening in the underground in group settings. But I think there's also that, that fear that kind of lingers in the ether collectively of like, is it safe? And, as we're starting to kind of have this second wave happen here in the States, it's like, is this safe to do? And how can I show up and continue to do my work when, there's not access to these circles, right?
Right. And what you say really speaks volumes to me is the identity of knowing when to surrender into what else can I do to live my life according to the spiritual practice of working with medicines or the therapeutic practice of working with medicines, and knowing that it's going to be there. I think that's one of the catch-22s is in our day today, especially with all the wonderful new legalization of medicine, such as out in Oregon and different places like that. We have to have hope too that on the other end of this, there's going to be opportunity, there's going to be chance. And so what can we do to incubate? Maybe setting a deeper intention, reconciling some of the things that we were chewing on from past sessions that might have been 6 months ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 years ago. There's always room to cultivate that integration.
Yeah. And I guess thinking about this liminal state that that we're in, like how have you been helping to serve your clients with integration? Like, are there any themes that you're noticing that have been throughout this time, and how are you trying to serve people with that? You know, you use that phrase "practical integration," and I'm just curious to kind of dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Two words that really resonate within the practice and some of the clients' work is this idea of initiation. This is a new initiation. And if we think about it, such as Joseph Campbell's journey work, or for example, the indigenous cultures, initiation is a lot of times we're left for solitude. And many of what my clients are saying is they're feeling more and more isolated. And speaking to that word isolation, speaking, Kyle, to the world of thresholds. So in this liminal space, what we're really expanding on and leaning into is this idea of what has solitude brought us, right? Mm-hmm. We all often speak about, oh, I can go sit and meditate for 30 minutes knowing I can jump back on my cell phone and be reconnected, or go, to the local coffee shop and reconnect. But now, even after such an isolating experience of meditation or yoga, we're still sitting with ourselves, right?
Right.
And so we're expanding on what does our threshold look like? What does our isolation really start to foster within us?
Mm. Yeah. How have you been, I guess, sitting with some of this isolation?
Well, I speak often that I'm not just a teacher, but I'm also a student. And so really harnessing some of the most elementary ideas, personally seeing my own therapist, connecting with couples therapists with my wife, where we're really evoking communication and falling and resting on some of the core patterns that I think we take advantage of, and myself included, realizing, journaling is an often awesome opportunity, doing expressive work, really building ritual, Kyle. When you say that, immediately what happens to me is not to the point of like all these rituals being mandatory, but having such a kind of plethora for a ritual that we can tap into something that resonates with us. So be it journaling, be it meditation, be it walks with fire. What calls to me as well now is tapping into the 4 elements, right? So again, elementary ideas solving for these complex concerns of, hey, I'm alone. How can I reconnect? How can I keep fostering a deeper ritual?
Yeah, I think ritual is really important. I'm just trying to think about like some of my rituals and just some of the inner work practices I kind of continue to do during this time. And those are the things that have really kind of kept me rooted and grounded during kind of like this collective chaos, and really spending a lot of time in nature. I think that's been one of the most important things for me, is really kind of taking time and being in nature to ground.
Sure. What draws you to certain things too is important. Knowing what you're actually seeking. I think understanding your motivations is becoming much more of imperative thing to do, right? You're not just doing it haphazardly or happenstance of like, oh, I have to do this with obligation, but you're actually doing it with a little more mindfulness is what I'm hearing too.
Yeah. And so, this is a conversation I've been having with some friends and just some people. And we're starting to go into the winter, and it's shorter days and colder. And I think when this pandemic started, we were hitting spring. I remember I was getting excited. I was able to get out and do gardening and prep my garden bed, and just be the warmth. Right, it felt like motivating. It's like, okay, here's like opportunity to be outside more. And just thinking about the isolation and the darkness that's probably coming upon us. And I'm not too sure when this episode is going to be released. And maybe we're in the middle of winter as this episode is out there. What are some tips and advice that maybe you've relied on, or maybe you will give, advice to clients thinking about, like, how do we take care of ourselves if this is continuing to go on? I know there's some hope around a vaccine, but I think, there's also probably going to be more isolation during these winter months in the darkness. And how are we staying grounded during this time?
That's a beautiful question. And I think it's a question that supports our intuition. So often what I'm hearing, even from you saying it, because I too am in the North Country of Minnesota, so it's like dark at 3. Ugh. And we have to lean into what we know. And often I remind people of, it's like that feeling of, remember in school when you said, oh, I should choose C for the answer, but then you do D and you don't listen to your intuition. My argument at this moment in time, in such a unique position in our world, is to just really, really, really cultivate, hone, and sharpen what you already know. And by doing that, we're building a foundation to really start to become closer and closer to what is our authenticity. And that can be through real simple exercises. What I've really been appreciative about people responding to my book is they're not things that are these esoteric experiences. They're really built upon, they're accessible. And then following that up, Kyle, by stretching yourself. And that's where I talk about that threshold. So we're really clear on what we know we can consume in safety and understanding. But where I think a lot of the evolved integration comes from is, well, now what are we going to stretch ourselves into, right? What are we going to stretch? And it's scary when you're by yourself because we're limited to what's between, our ears. That's where you reach out. And the third part would be like tethering, making sure you tether to people. Checking in, be it with your professional therapist, your circle of friends, and your community, to bounce ideas off of each other, right? Constant communication is really becoming more and more fundamental than anything.
Yeah. Intuition, I always kind of go back to that as well, but I think it's a hard thing to listen to. And do you have any tips for trying to cultivate intuition? And I think this also, really kind of plays into psychedelic integration as well. I always kind of talk about intuition and discernment. How do we know what's true when we're getting messages? When does it just feel like radio static, a bunch of just noise? But even if it feels bizarre, how do you know when to trust that?
Right. And I fall into, our model of holism. You and I both believe and really respect Stan's work, and Stan Groff speaking about seeking wholeness. And so to really fundamentally grow intuition, Kyle, I talk a lot about aligning what I've coined the 3 locks. And this is something I really belabor, but it's the 3 locks of consent, and consent with yourself. Does my physical body consent to this experience? Does my emotional heart consent to this experience? And is my cognitive thinking consenting to the experience? And I analogize it to something similar to like a cup of coffee or some sort of beverage of choice. Your physical body knows you want it. Your emotional heart will consent to it, and your cognition will consent to it. But if one of those 3 things are aligned or unaligned, we need to speak to that. We need to lean into listening to that. So at 10 o'clock at night, my physical body is not going to say, drink the cup of coffee. And I have to listen to that, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's a skill that's always evolving. And I think you have to put a lot of work to it. I'm always trying to figure out, how I feel like I do get a lot of intuitive insights, but there's times when I doubt it and I go, I don't know. And then those things start to unfold. I go, oh, maybe I should have listened to that a little bit more.
Right. It's that knowing versus what I knew, right?
Yeah.
And hindsight 2020. And I think we're often needing to be much more gentle with ourselves, supporting the conversation of, hey, we're all in this together. We're limited to our understanding of what really healing is. And that's what I've kind of been the prudent therapist of the classic idea of, hey, we're talking through things now more than almost probably to ad nauseum, right? So this just kind of redundancy. But that's the limit we can take it with the confines and the structure we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at some of my notes here and I'm thinking, you brought up this concept of what is safety. And I guess I'm just looking at that and thinking about like doing medicine work during this time and really kind of listening to our intuition. I feel like, this is a question that I get often with either like coaching clients or just people reaching out, is saying like, is it a safe time to do this? With everything that's going on, like, should I go to this group that I've heard about? How do I approach this medicine work during this time of uncertainty? And I always kind of come back to that, what's your body telling you? That intuition. Does it feel safe right now? And if you are kind of getting that ping, it's like, I don't know. Like, I really want to do this because I feel called to it. I think a lot of people are struggling right now. We know that, mental health issues are increasing due to isolation, due to uncertainty. And we want to do some healing work. But on the one hand, maybe it doesn't feel safe enough. So yeah, what is safety in this new world?
That's a great question. And what I love about what you just said is listening to your own body, because you're going to create the storyline. And what I've been witnessing in a personal experience myself is there's a lot of leaning into trying to stay away from this conversation of safety. Like, oh, I just trust myself. Or we've built upon this idea that if we have community or if we have the set and setting, as we often talk about in psychedelic work, that's kind of the mainstay and the foundation of all we need. What we're not talking about is all the cerebral and cognitive distortions that we're witnessing passively by just living in this world. And recently I talked to a group of people about that is, do you want to take that opportunity to really focus on this work? And do you feel that you aren't going to overreact if someone coughs in your circle? I mean, Think about that. Let's just practically talk about it. Ayahuasca is living with the experience of purging a ton, or breath work. It's all about that coughing and breathing and vomiting up and purging. So let's talk practicality without being a doctor, and let's talk about psychologically what that's going to do to you. And those triggers are just kind of jarring, right?
Oh, I mean, even just like walking down the street and hearing somebody cough, you're like, oh, what's...
Yeah, could you imagine? Yeah, sitting with 15 other people drinking tea. It's like, that's pretty courageous, right? And again, I lean back into going, well, what's the serving purpose? Loving acronyms is, what's the purpose? What's your expectations? What's your potential for doing this work? And can you put a pause on it? Is this an opportunity to pause for your own safety? Everybody has a different level of tolerance.
Right. And what about people that might want to kind of do this work at home? I feel like that's a question that comes up often. Well, I can't go to this group. I can't travel. Can I do this at home? Is it safe to do at home? And, I think I hear some people that are nervous about trying to do this work at home. And then other people are like kind of have this desperation of like, I'm kind of like hitting a wall and I need something.
Yeah. And fantastically, you have to ask yourself without judgment from my end. I really ask people to rule out what their experience working with medicine is. How often have they have they ever had the opportunity to do medicine work alone? Because even as early as us being youngsters, we've traditionally done it in the nature or in a recreational sense with a group of people.
Mhm.
And if you have the bandwidth and courage to do it alone, my request would be making sure you're tethered. I used that term in another kind of assigned meaning earlier. But Kyle, people need tethers then. Maybe you have someone on speed dial. Maybe you're having a sitter kind of remotely, right? So
Right.
in the advent of this luxury of digital media and digital devices, have kind of a safety net. I imagine you trapezing, right? Or flying out of an airplane, there's still safety nets that are always tethered to you. And having aftercare set up, having people know that you're doing it as if you were going on a excursion or a mountain climb, letting people know where you're going and what you're up to.
Hmm. Yeah, and you kind of bring up an interesting point here, and I wonder, with COVID and lockdowns and like, certain restrictions being lifted, talking about at home use and having the technology. And I really wonder how this is, either going to innovate or, create opportunity, or we realize it's a really terrible idea. But, I think we've been seeing this with like, some ketamine providers providing at home ketamine services. And there's a new peer support service that's being launched. I think it's called Fireside. I could be wrong about the name of that, but that seems really interesting too. Like this online peer support for people that are going through difficult times. It will be able to utilize the technology, and I really wonder what the landscape's going to look like. Like maybe more virtual trip sitting. I mean, that's not ideal, but
yeah. And I need to speak a little personal because over the course of COVID, I've actually gotten rid of my iPhone. I've gotten rid of all my digital devices. So what happened to me is I actually did ceremony recognizing the dysfunction of the social interaction with digital devices. So I would agree with you, Kyle. We're walking a very tightrope, a razor's edge of, yeah, there's always value in technology, but I personally endorse medicine work seems so interwoven in the ideas of stepping away from the television, stepping away from the computer, stepping away from the cell phone, stepping away from this false connection. And what I'm talking about from my personal story is making sure you're still engaged, right? So one thing to be safe, another thing to be like lost. And I think people have often done that. Now they're like lost in the cesspool of songs and they're like all by themselves and they can't get the right playlist. So their trip becomes this experience of going down the rabbit hole of trying to find the right psychedelic music. They report, the digital devices destroyed me. So it's super huge to speak about what that relationship is to you.
Right. I remember when I was, I don't know, 19, one of my first experiences, a friend handed me his phone to listen to music. And I looked at this and I said, I don't want to have anything to do with this device. I threw it on the ground.
Right. Well, that's usually the checkout for my clients is they'll say, is the device still three-dimensional or speaking to you? And I'm like, okay, you're still in process. Let's put that away.
Yeah, I think that's like the last thing I'd want to do is look at my device in the middle of that state. And I typically try not to.
Right.
So you said, you've kind of hinted towards this before and just now, like you kind of pushed, like you've kind of taken a break from some of the social media and technology part of your integration practice. And I wonder what that's been like for you and what was the decision to do that? And I feel like that might be really hard for people right now. It's this weird thing because I feel like during this time, I know I feel Zoom fatigued and I'm like, I don't want to sit in front of the computer at all. I just want to try to spend as much time doing other creative things. I don't want to look at social media. And there's a part of me that really wants to break away from it. And I feel like that is kind of part of the process. But, it's also, wow, being kind of like isolated. This is the only way that I'm really connecting with people. And it kind of feels healthy at times. And I feel like it's like, yeah, there's just so much happening. And there's a part of me that wants to break free from it and just remove myself. But also at the same time, it's like we're in this weird predicament where it's like, well, this is how we are connecting with people and how we're kind of keeping our social engagement alive.
Yeah. And so to answer your question directly, I had a experience with medicine that introduced me to the tethers and the needs. So I don't discount the value all the while we used the word synchronicity, Kyle, and it was, the advent of social dilemma, the documentary, and people talking about it in my practice. And so I took it upon myself, again, being a student of things and challenging myself. All these different ideas came up, and I don't see a limit to it. I'm still engaging, and I really argue the difference between this false connection of, great, I have 600 friends on Facebook, or I'm following 700,000 people on Instagram. It's a false sense of anxiety that's being evoked. And I don't want to digress from psychedelic medicine conversations here, but what I've really learned from now being 6 months away from an iPhone, being 6 months really clear from doing email connections, I myself is on Zoom as a clinician all day long, realized I need to practically learn what it's like to read a real book. Right. And so it's all evoked. And the same reason why I don't have a version of my book on Kindle is I want people to touch and feel things and really embody the tactile living. And we have to consciously watch what we're consuming, being prudently aware of this mindful consumption rather than this I think, or inappropriate consuming of information when we don't even know why we just touched our phone or why we just engaged in learning more, and without sounding blasphemous, because I love the internet. What's it for? What are we doing it for?
Yeah.
And personally, I've learned a ton about just being present to my children, my wife, my family, and friends, and still able to use a phone. I'm not adventing, going to live in a mountain cabin without talking to people. I'm talking about engagement rather than false. So I call people and they're like, what are you doing? I'm talking to you.
So early 2000s and 90s. And
yeah, how dare you? Where's your pager? Why don't you beat
So
me?
you said you don't have an iPhone. Did you convert back to a landline, or have you had a landline?
Without being too endorsing, I use a phone called a light phone, where it's a phone that just is a telephone and rudimentary. That's all it is. The capabilities are telephone and
Cool.
Yeah. It challenges people, though. One thing I want to say, and I think it would be super supportive, is as we're living in isolation, you realize who you're really valuing and who people value you. It's not this identity of, that's what gets really destabilizing. And it transfers a lot in what I've seen clients. Where their value is, their reassurance, they still want to feel important.
And do you feel like, we get that importance through social media interactions, or are you trying to say how do we develop, I guess, healthier connections with our friends that we may not always touch base with because we're engaging with more of a social media network?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, because we met on social media. We connected through this. So I can't say that it's all bad. I don't think it's all bad. I just, again, what are you doing with it? Are you just staying stagnant with it, or are you actually evolving conversations or really wanting to develop a relationship with the person? We've built a fundamental relationship professionally through social media, so I don't discount it. But to speak qualitatively is how often are you getting lost in people you don't even know?
Right.
And how often are you reaching out to people that could actually be there for you? And it leads to psychedelic medicine work. Are you leaning on the people that could actually support you?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that just this conversation of digital hygiene is just really important as we, co-evolve with technology, and it's just part of us. It's like an extension of our nervous system at this point. And how do we develop these healthy relationships with it? And that's always something that's, I guess, really I think about pretty often during journeys is, what is my relationship to this device? And how do I engage with people with it? How do I not get so consumed mindlessly with it? And I mean, it's hard, right? And especially during a time now where it's some people have so much free time and, really not really knowing what to do with their time. And it's just so easy to kind of get lost in these digital realms. And
and Kyle, I love it to go back to the who are we without medicine as a fundamental question. And then aligning that with intention and integration is, what is the higher level of intention we're living? So if we are going to take the challenge to dive into medicine work by ourselves, we should still be constructing something that's higher level and to speak volumes of motivating the purpose of why we're doing it. If you're just doing it to do it because you think that's the next thing, I'd ask you, what are you doing in your life away from the medicine? And not to be prudent or blasphemous towards psychedelics, but there's such a plethora of things, as you alluded to earlier: gardening, engaging in yoga, breath work, meditation, drumming. Maybe it's a new hobby that you always said I never had time for, right?
Right. And I feel like that is part of the integration, at least for me, right? It's like, and I was mentioning this a little bit before we started recording, is sometimes I really kind of view the goal here with psychedelics and, non-ordinary states. It's like, how do we bring that back to each moment? How do we bring that experience back and say like, wow, gardening is psychedelic. Going for a walk is psychedelic. I can see that magic in each moment. And how do I really embrace that? Because I feel like sometimes that is the integration work and that is sometimes the work. And I don't know, for me, it's like, how do I live that in each moment? And it's a practice. It's hard. And then, do I go back into those journey states when I need, a hard reminder or maybe a gentle reminder? I've kind of gotten a little bit lost and it's like, okay, it got me back on track. And how do I bring that back into the present moment again?
Kyle, that's very refreshing. And I love that you called it living in the psychedelic as you're walking. It's not as if things are melting, but it's that state of flow, right? It's that state of, oh, this is why I was drawn to this behavior, or this is why I was drawn and interested in this activity. I'm actually fluidly present and very rewarding. And I think psychedelics teaches many people that is, okay, this is the flow state I want to be in. And now how can I sustain it?
Right. And I think about some of my earlier experiences where, it's like, why did I really appreciate that experience? Well, it kind of made me enter back into a childlike state, and I was able to view the world through a new way of seeing and see things from a new perspective and be able to laugh. And it's like, well, how could I just, walk down the street and watch the birds play or the squirrels run and find like love in that and find curiosity in that experience? And for me, that's very psychedelic. It's just being in that present moment and just being curious about what's happening around me with an open mind and with love, and just like, just be like, wow, like the world is very magical and it's unfolding in front of me. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And I think for me, that's like what the psychedelic experience has reminded me, it's here in each moment. You just have to slow down enough to really appreciate it. And for me, that's really kind of kept me grounded during this time, just being able to go outside and watch the birds or watch the animals or just watch nature do its thing. I go, okay, there's a bigger process unfolding, and how can I really trust this in each moment?
Most definitely. And what I love about that and translate it from my own perspective is it doesn't have to be so big, so looming, right? What I hear you saying that I completely endorse too is we can actually find the simplicity in things without having to make it so like existential, or what's the meaning of life, or what are we here for? How are we doing? Like, let's slow down and smell the proverbial flowers, right?
Yeah. And I just love this concept about like, who are we without the medicine? And that's something that I've been really thinking about over the past few months. And I wonder how you can relate to it is, Joe and I haven't been able to do any breath work really. And our teachers, probably aren't going to host any workshops or retreats. I mean, they're projecting 2022. I mean, really kind of depending on the vaccine and how things are unfolding. I mean, they're obviously older, higher risk to run workshops and get exposed. But, I think about that and I go, well, who am I if I can't run a breathwork workshop? And I've translated breathwork online a little bit, but it's not the same. And for me, safety is utmost importance. And I go, does this feel safe enough to do with somebody online? How's their environment? Doing a longer session online, could that bring stuff up? Do I have the time to be with them for hours if that does happen? And so who am I without the medicine and not being able to really share that work? And I always go back and forth. It's like, should I be trying to convert this online a little bit more to give access to people? And, there's this back and forth, this weirdness of going, I feel like my whole life's work and personality is revolved around this. And now all of a sudden I can't really do much of it.
Right. And I'm in the same boat, practicing breath work. It was easy for us to tap into that. And then we had to shut it down intimately. Yeah. And I agree with you. It's who are we becomes the question of trusting the process. And it's also checking in with how important the physical connection is. I myself don't advocate for the online either, because what challenges me is the fear of, like you said, someone falling into process that I can't witness their body. Mm-hmm. I can't check in with what their reaction time is. And so to get back to the question of who are we without the medicine, is maybe we need to open up to really redefining ourselves and leaning into things that become so important to get through this. And to speak eloquently about it is learning to trust other things within yourself. Again, what's our inner healer saying? Who is our intuition saying? What are we really wanting? And can we formulate healing in that? Right? Some of the most amazing transcendences are personal. And do we need to lean, without being disrespectful to the medicine, is do we need it to evoke that? Is that a state of being that we can find within ourselves through evocative breathing, through a great song, sexual pleasure with your partner, whatever? There's other avenues. That's right. What that leads me to is the plethora of opportunity outside of taking psilocybin or doing an ayahuasca ceremony. Plethora of experiential experiences that are very evocative towards healing.
Mm. And do you offer any of the suggestions towards clients that may kind of be asking the same question, like, hey, like I've been engaging in this work for a while and now all of a sudden I don't have it. Like, thinking about this practical integration, like how are you helping people to approach this during their integration in this liminal phase here?
Yes. We talk a lot about, and the latest kind of creation of it or invitation would be falling into different exercises that are drumming, that are going out on a pilgrimage with a tent, right? So kind of really recreating personal growth and trusting that kind of nature versus like what someone's telling us. So to speak a little bit more about it, maybe you have a drum that's been sitting in the corner. Maybe you have a guitar sitting in the corner that you're like, I haven't touched it for a while. Challenging yourself to really kind of use your hands. I think that's the large aspect too, is finding dance as an awesome opportunity. I could go down the litany of this with my clients and they'll go, oh, I forgot that I was interested in that. One of my clients is like, oh, I used to do like bonsai trimming of trees. And they're like, I forgot I actually was into that. So I think we often too, Kyle, is put too much emphasis on not doing the work. And what that leads me to be is who are we without the medicine? Is we're also needing to actively work, do something, dust things off that have been on the shelf. I know I myself have a djembe drum in the basement and I was like, oh, I should probably, and you can find some real flow state in doing these experiential hands-on, right? And I'm not a neuroscientist, but using both sides of the brain and your full body really evokes that non-ordinary state.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about my own process and thinking like, I just picked up the guitar again and I always go on these like, I'm into it and then I put it down. I think I put it down for the past like 3 years and I started picking it up again. I'm like, oh my God, why haven't I been doing this over the past 3 years? Like, why did I get so distracted with like, this project in grad school and this and that I just totally pushed it aside. And now I'm like rediscovering me like, wow, this is such a great integration technique. It's like being able to channel my experience through music. I mean, that's huge, right? It's like you're working with the experience, you're moving it in a different way. It's hard, it's challenging. It's like learning a different language for myself. That, and even I remember getting more into biking. I'm like, I love this. Why am I not doing this more often? And then to part of my mind, I'm like, well, it's not the inner work. And then I have to balance it out and going, well, actually movement is work and we need to continue to do that. I mean, I definitely get caught up in the psychoanalyzing and needing to like, try to figure it all out and realizing like, wow, then I start neglecting my body, and actually doing this is, I think, actually a big part of my work. It's actually moving that energy, gets stagnant. How do I get that flowing again in a different way? And I think that's all really important.
It's super important. And what I love is I hear what is work, right? What is the definition?
Yeah.
We think we have to go through this trials and tribulations or struggles to find some kind of healing or some kind of connection. And I think you talking about bicycling or doing the guitar is a perfect example. It doesn't have to be this arduous discipline built in with like tireless healing or trauma being induced. It can actually be something that we're good at, something that we trust in ourselves. We live in this world that is so surrounded by consuming. I need to learn something new. I need to take on more information. Well, what I hear you saying too is how can we integrate with trusting what we already know, what's already within us, right? And that's beautiful integration.
Yeah. And I don't know, what drew you to psychotherapy, but for me, it's that analytical part. I'm like, I need to try to figure all this stuff out cognitively. I need to put all the pieces together. And I think for me, also kind of questioning therapy, it's like, why do I always need to do that? Is that always helpful? Can I actually do the work through movement and exercise or gardening or, things that aren't so, cognitive? And I think that's really what started to draw me towards the somatic realm. It's like, being in the transpersonal was like, just wanting to constantly be in the mystical state through all these different activities, drumming, breath work, plant medicine, dream analysis, just constantly being in that and then neglecting the body and then coming back and being like, wait a minute, why do I always need to be either in the mystical or psychoanalyzing? Is actually the work it's a balance, right? It's going back and forth. Sometimes we need to be in the mystical. Sometimes we really need to be in the body. And I realize that's my edge. It's like, how do I push myself to do that? Because I do feel that stagnant energy that is so analytical, so cognitive. It's just all up here all the time.
Right.
And how do I start to move that differently?
Yeah, Kyle. And at the end of the day, what are we doing is but overconsumption of like, okay, we're going to do this till we're going at 190%, and then we put it on the shelf and go to do that. So it's like what I'm hearing is an invitation of moderation too. Okay, COVID has taught us that we can't do just all experiential work. It's not as accessible. So I've learned a deep sense of appreciation. You asked how I got into psychotherapy. Is similar to you, is very cognitive. So now I'm really respecting the fundamental ancestors that develop these practices, that have these cognitive behavioral, these talk therapies, and I'm just sharpening them. Do I want to use them for the rest of my life? No, but when it's time to harness somatic work again, a more appropriate safety, then we know we can do it with a balance, right? It's a great statement. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And at the end of the day, we're not gifted with the opportunity of knowing these medicines are going on to the next mystery too. So the next mystery being death is we can really clear ourselves up without leaning into these medicines. We're going to be just that much more prepared for the next experience.
Yeah. So last time we chatted, we talked a little bit about some of your work with sexuality. And I wonder if like you want to dig into that. And I know that's something I think you wanted to touch on for today. And I think we touched on it briefly last time. It'd be interesting to kind of dig into that work. I don't know
Thank
if we've
you.
really chatted about too much of it, even with other guests on the show.
Well, that means a lot to me. It's a challenging conversation for many people to have and many people to hear. So prior to saying that, I really want to advocate for sexuality is one of the largest triggering conversations. And me walking into this with you, I need to advocate for consent. If it gets too graphic or too much, it can traumatize people. So I really want to endorse your callers and listeners' personal safety. Sexuality is a loaded conversation. And when I work with people, it is really predominantly focused on sexual trauma, sexual addiction, sexual authenticity. Even in the year 2020, people still reconciling and grappling with what I call their sexual script. How do I evoke it? And what I learned is there's a confluence and there's an interweaving when people are working with psychedelics, that many of their sexual relationships come up, maybe grieving past relationships, maybe grieving their sexual identity. I work with a lot of people with gender transitioning. So we are grappling with some deep, deep subject matters.
Yeah. And with some of the clients that come to you, are some of them using psychedelics and exploring sexuality and trying to heal some of those traumas with psychedelics? Or are you just kind of general?
So it's an and. Many of my clients are coming in to heal sexual trauma, sexual addiction, sexual identity. And then they notice by the love affair of Google that, oh, Ryan also evokes some psychedelic things. And they're like, they have to ask. And oftentimes I consensually bring up the conversation and I say, hey, before you guys get lost in the rabbit hole, I talk about psychedelics. And if you want to know what that means as it relates to sexual growth and sexual authenticity, I'd be happy to share it with you. It's really beneficial because much of the trauma is embodied, right? And so when we're dealing with psychedelics and working with integrating psychedelic medicines, as you eloquently said, it's a somatic embodied experience as well. And much of sexual addiction or sexual relationships or sexual authenticity is very stigmatized. And we're quick to censor it, Kyle. And so in my office, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, why do you think that is? Like, I'm just even thinking from the psychology realm too, like, Freudian always kind of talked about sexual energy. Yeah, Freudian psychology talks about sexual energy, but also Reich too. And Reich was very into like orgone energy, that sexual energy. And it's like and culturally, I think we just kind of push this topic to the side. And so I'm wondering what your take is around why is it so stigmatized and why is it hard for us to explore that, even though it's part of the human experience?
Sure. And that is a conundrum. I grew up by the high school. I lived in Sweden, and to not be too tangent based, but I had the beautiful opportunity to live for 2 years in Sweden and hear and witness such a sexually open and liberal community. And growing up in, the heart of Minnesota, it was like this dichotomy. And so to answer your question in that short story, I think culturally, it's a huge story. I just was speaking to a doctor and they're talking about even the way they speak about body parts. We introduce body parts without talking about the language of what the body part is. We're talking about woo-woos and little things instead of the real genitals or penises and vaginas. And so it's like, I think we're ingrained with not talking about it. We're reinforced with keeping it secretive, no matter what the sexuality is. And so then to add that into the conversation of trauma or authenticity, it's very shaming. One of the things I say really, really shortly and briefly is I often say, imagine talking about quitting alcohol in front of your family. They're going to endorse gratitude for you quitting and everyone's going to be excited. So now let's superimpose the conversation and say, oh, I'm trying to think about considering this for my sexual proclivity or who I am, or I have a sexual addiction to porn, which much of my clients deal with. It's like radio silence. So we're still not, I think, accepting of even the identity of what people are struggling with within their relationships or I mean, I see that quite often, and without going into, hours of conversation, but even in couples, people are like unaware of what they can share, unaware of entering into what they want to ask for. And that's where the intersection of psychedelics happens, is it gives them this embodied expression of, this is genuinely who I am, sexually, emotionally, spiritually. And it's quite beautiful. Then it's about teaching them how to express it without, it going out sideways.
Right. And I know sexual energy is kind of tied to creative energy. And I think it's like kind of like soul energy, and like just thinking about like how much we suppress that at times and how much maybe we suppress parts of ourselves. Right. And just thinking about in the psychedelic experience, tapping into this type of energy and finding a form of self-expression. It's like, whoa, this is totally new. And yeah, how do we start to work with that energy, even if it's not so sexual, right? Sometimes I do see that more, that energy is tied up with creativity and expression. And how do we start to even tap into that and trust that? Because I feel like that's scary. It's like, ooh, there's this part of me that's really bubbling up, and I'm actually afraid to step into that. It feels new. It feels scary.
It does. And I really appreciate how you tie those into the idea of creativity. And because I'm a sex therapist and work with sexuality, I think it has a lot to do with this embedded shame cycle, censorship, weaving into not being safe. Earlier, I spoke, Kyle, about this idea of a core sexual script. And what I've witnessed is some of the most fundamental and basic experiences we had as children around sex endorses our core beliefs or mistaken beliefs around then what we're looking for or what we're able to ask for, right? Mom and dad were really good about hiding and not talking about things. And they were also, to use your creative expression, oh, you're awesome, Johnny, you're great at drawing. Then you get to school and people are like, Johnny, you suck at drawing. And what are you going to hold on to?
Right.
The censorship of I suck and I'm not going to ask for it. Well, the same thing happens with sexuality, Kyle. Your first partner, your first sexual expression is like traditionally an amazing opportunity and lens to go, okay, now this is what I've learned, and breaking down those constructs and trusting that expression, right? In a safe way. Again, here we go, bringing back safety. Can I be safe expressing my sexual fluidity or sexual expression with my partner, my wife, my husband, anyone I'm with, right?
Yeah. I guess on that topic of safety, how do we cultivate safety? I know that's kind of such a nuanced question, a nuanced topic, because that could look like so many different things for people. But I guess, what is safety to you in the context of like, either psychedelics or sexuality?
Yeah. Endorsing consent is safety. Knowing, I analogize it to walking into a home or an apartment, making sure you're going through each window, turning over each couch, each door, walking in, asking questions. This is where people and your listeners might roll their eyes, but I'm a firm believer of talking until I'm blue in the face, even if it is a sexual expression. I go to a lot of colleges and work with college students, and I say, okay, you go to a drunken party and you're sitting there. It's okay to talk it out. It will be there. If it's right and if it's important, you'll have the expression to be able to be connecting with your partner or have a sexual experience or have a psychedelic experience. And so interchanging, speaking to the youth about the value of real negotiation, of real conversation, of real embedded sanctity. And I'm not trying to make everything sound sacred, but safety is sacred conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that.
Well, it comes back full circle to what we're kind of trying to harness, because we can't experience it as often. Listening to your body and saying, okay, yeah, this is what I want. Is it okay? I think that's what leads people down the rabbit hole of not being authentic, is they think their partner is going to reject them, or they think they're going to be rejected. And so safety has a lot to do with trusting you're not going to be rejected. If you're just talking about it.
Right. And just just had a flashback to an experience I had. I remember I was laying on the couch at a friend's house, and I just had this surge of emotional energy. And I just looked at them. I said, "Is it okay if I cry right now?" And they just looked at me. They're like, and it was like, are they going to reject me, or are they going to think I'm weird if I let this go? And it was like, yeah, just to hear, yes, it's totally okay. I mean, really opened me up, but it was also scary to even just like think about letting myself do that in front of somebody. It was like, like.
What ended up happening?
I ended up going into it and really kind of letting it flow.
Love it.
Yeah.
It's consent, though. It's knowing that you're safe in your environment, and it's alarming what we learn through psychedelics and the identity of rejection. It's just tremendously alarming. And then trusting it.
Trust. I feel like we keep coming back to that. How do we trust it? Trust our intuition, trust, yeah.
And that's the full-bodied experience, is, to wrap it up in a nutshell, in an idea that it's not very complete, but at least sustainable, right? Is, am I engaged with people that I believe in, right? Am I evoking confidence and authenticity of being truthful to myself? Radical honesty with self is trust, I think, is saying, hey, no matter if this is on the other end of rejection, I'm at least sharing this. I also believe trying not to hurt yourself, right? You're not putting yourself out there to hurt yourself. You're walking into the waters with who you are and who you're with.
Yeah. I love that. Radical honesty is trust. Really stuck out.
Thank you. Well, and it's defined in my assigned meaning I give it is the idea of knowing that if I can say it to myself, why can't I say it to, and this is specifically within regards to people that I'm with, that I believe in. If I'm actually actively participating with these people because I trust them, I should be radically honest and let them know where I'm at. Yeah. With the idea of not trying to hurt them, not trying to hurt myself, but keep fostering growth and potential.
Yeah. Awesome, Ryan. I think we're about to get at time. So I wonder if there's anything that, you want to close with, anything that's kind of still in your mind that's churning.
No, really, I'm profoundly honored to be here and talk to you, Kyle. I think it's always a wonderful organic conversation. I would just highlight that trusting yourself and making it your own. I always endorse the idea of two things, and that's being gentle with yourself as you explore these states. Knowing that if they're here now, they'll potentially probably be here later. And trusting in the process, really being kind to the people. I think right now it sounds really hippie and probably new agey, but what more better time to be living with intentional compassion for one another and understanding, really seeking understanding of where everyone's at. It's been a wonderful conversation today.
Yeah, beautiful. And I just really want to echo being gentle on yourself. I feel like this is a big thing that keeps coming up. And yeah, just everything that's going on. It's like, how can we pull back and just be a little gentle with ourselves? And it's okay, right? Whatever's coming up. I mean, we're kind of in this soup together. And how can we just create a little bit more gentleness in our lives?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm profoundly grateful to keep saying it. It doesn't hurt. We can say that till we're blue in the face.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know that you said you got off of social media for a little bit, but I wonder, where can people find your work?
So my website, Healing Souls, SOULS, LLC.com. Both give you links to the book, the Psychedelics Integration Handbook, and connecting with me. Always more than welcome to reach out to me via my email, Ryan Westrum, WESTRUM @gmail.com. And let's have a conversation. I'd love to talk. I'd love to answer questions, evoke the connection to engagement.
All right. Awesome, Dr. Westrum. I got some leaf blowers outside, so it's starting to get noisy, and I guess this is a good time to wrap. Okay. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Ryan Westrum. Again, if you want to check out his previous episode, you can go back into the Psychedelics Today archive and check that out, and check out his website at healingsouls, llc.com or psychedelicintegration.net. Yeah, that was a really fun conversation, and always really great to catch up with Ryan and just kind of riff a little bit about what he's been up to and just psychedelic integration in general. It's always a pleasure. If you have any comments or questions or anything, feel free to email us at psychedelicstodayemail@gmail.com. And again, feel free to support us by subscribing to our podcast on any of the podcast apps, leaving us a review on iTunes or Facebook, and be sure to follow us on all the social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We'd love to see you over there. And yeah, another way to support the show is sharing a piece of our content. That helps to go a long way, just getting our message out there and letting other people know what we're doing over here at Psychedelics Today. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week, and we will catch you on the next episode, and have a wonderful week.